Happy New Year to everyone. Um, let's call this hearing to order. And before we continue, we'll direct the committee secretary to acknowledge our resource persons for today.
Good morning, Your Honor. For today's public hearing on the Passive Income and Financial Intermediary Taxation Act bills, we have the following resource persons. From the Department of Finance, we have Assistant Secretary Carlo Fermin S. Adriano and Attorney Nina Asuncion. From the National Tax and Research Center, we have Ms. Marlene A. Lucero Calubag and Ms. Monica G. Rempilio. From the Development Bank of the Philippines, we have Assistant Vice President Maylene A. Perez. From the Capital Market Development Council, we have Ms. Maria Gracia Casals Diaz. From Dubaladad and Associates, we have Attorney Benedicta Dubaladad. From the Financial Executives Institute of the Philippines, we have Attorney Eric R. Ricalde. From the Tax Management Association of the Philippines Incorporated, we have Attorney Jacqueline U. Villar and Attorney Martin Ignacio Mijares. From the Bankers Association of the Philippines, we have Ms. Chona Reyes. From the Philippine Dealing and Exchange Corporation, we have Mr. Antonino A. Nakpil and Ms. Teresa B. Ravalo. From PEZA, we have Attorney Jenny Romero and Ms. Christy Cañete. That will be all, Your Honor.
Thank you. Thank you, Committee Secretary. To be honest, we have uh, we have a lot of resource persons for this bill. We divided it into two, so we'll be conducting another hearing. Today, we invited the government agencies, the banking industry, some GOCCs who are affected by this bill. But later on in the second hearing, we'll be inviting some of the capital markets stakeholders, as well as the insurance industries, and also GOCCs, because if you go through the bill, there are a lot of provisions there that will repeal some of the provisions of the different GOCCs, which are being governed by special law. So we'll invite them in the second hearing. So we'll have a in-depth and robust discussion today. We limited the number of participants so that we can have longer discussions. Today we'll be hearing 5 bills. The first one is Senate Bill number 900. And let me just read the title so that it will be reflected into the records. An act amending sections 22, 24, 25, 27, 28, 32, 34, 37, 38, 39, 42, 51, 52, 54, 56, 57, 73, 108, 121, 122, 123, 174, 176, 179, 181, 182, 183, 184, 185, 186, 187, 195, 198, and 199, repealing sections 175, 177, 178, 180, 188, 192, and 193, all under Republic Act number 8424, otherwise known as the National Internal Revenue Code of 1997, as amended, and for other purposes, introduced by Senator Pia Cayetano. Napakahaba po yung title, but the short abbreviation of this title is PIFITA. I think everyone is quite familiar with the acronym of PIFITA. PIFITA is short for Passive Income and Financial Intermediary Taxation Act. So this is the description of that bill that I mentioned. We're also tackling Senate Bill number 1347, authored by yours truly. We're also tackling Senate Bill number 1364, authored by Senator Estrada. We're also tackling Senate Bill number 1848, otherwise known, introduced by Senator Tulfo. All of these Senate bills are virtually the same in terms of titles. And the House has already transmitted to us House Bill number 4339. And this is also a bill on PIFITA, except they included some other provisions in this bill, and we'll be discussing that later on. So we'll be tackling 5 bills, 4 from the Senate, 1 transmitted from the House to the Senate. And just a short opening statement. I read the bill, I read PIFITA throughout, I read the entire bill, and there's 3 words that I would like to describe PIFITA. 3 words: no? Simplify, simplify, and simplify. No? Simplify in terms of understanding the taxation covering the financial industry. Simplify compliance from the point of view of our taxpayers. And simplify tax administration from the point of view of our revenue collecting agencies. So 3 words that will enhance the experience in terms of administration, in terms of tax collecting, covering our financial institutions. However, this bill is not without challenges. I read the materials given to us by the Department of Finance, and later on we'll give the Department of Finance a chance to present this bill and also their findings, that there might be some adverse impact on terms of revenue collection, no? Because we'll be adjusting some of the rates covering the different passive incomes and also financial intermediaries, and there might be some negative impact in terms of revenue collection. And in my point of view, this negative impact might not be timely because we're still reeling and recovering from the effects of the pandemic. And one of the huge effects of the pandemic to our fiscal health is the increase in terms of public debt. During the pandemic, we actually increased public debt from 30% of our GDP to almost 60% of our GDP. We doubled it in the span of 2 or 3 years because we had to buy vaccines, we had to buy a lot of PPEs and all the necessary equipment to fight COVID-19. And because of that, we had to borrow from different multilateral institutions, and our public debt doubled in the last 2 or 3 years. After that, the Department of Finance legislated a medium-term fiscal framework that will manage our fiscal situation for the next few years, including how to reduce our public debt or how to outgrow our public debt in the next 4 to 5 years. By outgrowing a public debt, that means we need to be efficient in terms of tax collection, and as much as possible, we should not reduce our revenue take so that we can outgrow our public debt. But later on, throughout the discussion, we will hear the Department of Finance as to what is the revenue impact of this bill. Of course, there's pros and cons. There might be negative revenue impact on our on this proposal. However, the other side is we might be growing the financial sector, including insurance sector, including capital markets, and because of that growth, we will also collect more, and hopefully we can mitigate the negative revenue impact of this proposed measure. So later on, we will discuss that, and I would like to hear also from our stakeholders how this proposed measure can grow your sector. It's also important that to understand from the experts' point of view on how this particular proposal can grow our capital markets, can grow our insurance markets, our insurance sector, and other components of our financial industry. It's important to know that because in the quest to mitigate the negative revenue impact, we also want to make sure that it's also contributing to the growth of our financial sector. So with that, as an opening statement, we'll go do the rounds as usual. We'll start off with our government agencies, particularly the Department of Finance, and then later on we'll hear some of the tax experts in our government, and then we'll do the rounds ending with our financial sector and our experts from our financial sector. And feel free to interject later on if you have any questions regarding the presentation of our government agencies. So with that, we'll start off with the Department of Finance for their presentation. We'll start off with, who will present? See, Asa Carlo, are you present? Okay.
Good morning, to Senator Win. Good morning, everyone. I'm Assistant Secretary Carlo Fermin Adriano from the Department of Finance, and I will be presenting Package 4 of the Comprehensive Tax Reform Program. I would like to note that there may be some changes in the DOF proposal, given that we have a new secretary, and as mentioned by Senator Gatchalian, there's some revenue impact for the Package 4, so there may be some changes, but probably, hopefully, minor changes. Next slide, please. So the goal of the reform is to redesign the financial sector taxation to be simpler, fairer, more efficient, and regionally more competitive. Next slide. Aside from this, the other goal is to make general tax compliance easier and taxation equitable to ensure progressivity, boost our tax effort, and increase tax trust. So this is consistent to what Senator Gatchalian mentioned earlier. Next. So this lists the reasons why we need to reform the passive income and financial intermediary state tax system. So I will go one by one, discuss each problem, and we will discuss each solution for each problem. Thank you. Next slide, please. So first problem is that there are multiple tax rates and bases, make the tax structure very complicated, causing arbitrage and unfairness. So your rate will depend on your product, currency, maturity, issuer, taxpayer, residency, business status. Next slide, please. So our solution is to reduce the number of combination of tax rates and bases from 83 to 56. We'll provide more discussion of the details later. Next slide, please. So problem number 2 is that Philippines has among the highest passive income and tax rates in the region, reducing its competitiveness. Now this figure shows you the tax on interest income is actually generally higher in the Philippines compared to the ASEAN average. As you can see here, yung Philippines, yung may black bar, tayo may pinamataas, and then the dotted green line is the average for the ASEAN. Next slide. Same story for royalty. We have one of the highest royalty in the ASEAN region. And again, the Philippines is the black bar, and then the dotted green line is the ASEAN average. Next slide, please. So our solution is to harmonize and lower the tax rates. So from high to low. Next slide, please. Problem number 3 is that inequitable distribution of tax burden. Given the current system, the rich usually enjoys lower tax rate than the poor. An example of this is yung deposits. Usually, for short-term deposit, you're slapped with a 20%. However, for the long-term deposit, it can be as low as 0% or 5%. So basically it's kind of biased for the rich in the current system. Next slide, please. So our solution is to harmonize and lower the tax rates on interest income. So what we're proposing is that there will be a gradual reduction, so from 20% down to 15% by 2028. Why is there gradual reduction? It's because of the revenue impact, to soften the blow of the revenue losses. Next slide, please. So same with royalties. So from 20% down to 15%. Next slide. And then for the capital, for the dividends, we will increase it from 10 to 15%. So basically, all the passive income will be at 15%. Next slide. Problem number 4 is the shallow equity and debt capital market. Now, this figure shows you the broad money as a percent of GDP is among the lowest in the region. As you can see here, yung Philippines as of 2020, it's at 90 billion. Compare that to Malaysia and Thailand. They have 53% more and 42% more compared to Philippines. Next slide. Similar story for this graph. This graph shows you the market capitalization of listed domestic companies as of May 2023 in billion USD. And as you can see in the ASEAN region, yung naka-box, we're second to the lowest, just slightly above Vietnam. Next slide, please. So our solution is, again, to lower the tax rate on passive income and harmonize the tax treatment between equity and debt. So we're also proposing that the sales of shares of stock of domestic corporation in foreign stock exchange instead of a 15% capital gain stock, we will now slap it with a stock transaction tax. And for the stock transaction tax, we're actually decreasing it to 0.1% by 2028. This will allow companies to expand sources of capital and to increase their liquidity. Next slide, please. So as mentioned earlier, we will equate the DST for debt and equity. Currently, the current system mas mataas yung sa equity at 1% compared to the debt at 0.75%. So we'll equate the two at 0.75%. Next slide, please. Fifth problem is the uneven playing field among financial institutions. It gives advantage to certain sectors. So non-lending income of banks and quasi-banks are subject to 7%, but other FIs are subject to 5%. And then some are slapped with 1%. Next slide, please. So our solution is to equalize the tax treatment for all financial intermediaries. So our proposal is, instead of having 1%, 5%, and 7%, it will now be 5% gross receipt tax for banks and quasi-banks. Next slide, please. The sixth problem is the unequal treatment for insurance products with similar nature, which gives advantage to certain sectors. So life insurance premium is subject to 2% premium tax, but pre-need contribution is subject to 12% VAT. And life insurance levied graduated and fixed DST with 200 as maximum, but non-life insurance is levied with a 12.5% DST. Next slide, please. So our solution is to harmonize the rates for life and health insurance and non-life insurance. So again, instead of having a 2% premium tax and a 12% VAT, we will harmonize it. All will now be slapped with a 2% premium tax. Now, why is it a premium tax instead of VAT 12%? Because premium tax is more appropriate, given that this is more of an investment rather than consumption. Next slide, please. Problem number 7 is the high friction costs due to DST or documentary stamp tax. So summary of the issues. Not all DST rates are expressed in ad valorem. Second, DST on debt and equity instrument vary, which I've already discussed earlier that we will equate it. Number 3, non-life insurance products have high and varying DST rates. Fourth, fees on domestic money transfers are subject to DST. And fifth, there are multiple DST with low revenue take. Next slide, please. So our solution is to generally harmonize and rationalize or lower the rates on DST. So first one, we will express all DST rates in ad valorem, in percent. Second, again, this was mentioned earlier, we will equate DST on debt and equity. So both will be at 0.75%. And then we will also unify all non-life insurance rates and lower them gradually. So from the current 12.5 and 7.5%, we will harmonize everything and gradually lower it at 7.5%. And then fourth, we will remove DST on domestic money transfer to support financial inclusion. Current system is at 0.3%, so we will reduce it to 0%. and then remove provisions with lower revenue take, like yung proxies and powers of attorney. Next slide, please. Eighth problem is the high administrative and compliance costs, given the various rates. So it's prone to tax calculation error, and there's an opportunity for tax avoidance and evasion. So the solution is, next slide, please. So reduce administrative and compliance costs by simplifying tax policy. So that's why we're harmonizing as much as possible the rates so that it will be easier for tax compliance and tax administration, and it will also lessen the opportunity for tax arbitrage and evasion. Next slide, please. So the ninth problem is the narrow tax base due to many exemption and special rates. There are 48 laws outside the NRC on passive income, and the solution is, next slide, please. We will repeal 35 laws, but lower rates will mitigate the tax burden. So of that 35 laws to be repealed, 16 are true repeals and 19 are housekeeping, cleaning up repeals. Next slide, please. And then aside from those 9 proposals, we have some enhancements on the package 4. The first one is the removal of pickups from the exemption of excise tax on automobiles. Now, pickup trucks were granted special tax treatment under the train law for their utility as workhorses for small business owners and professionals in their livelihood. However, the DTI observed that manufacturers modify pickup trucks to serve as passenger, leisure, or sports utility vehicles. So we're proposing to actually remove their exemption from excise tax. This will remove the inequity and counter adverse impact of such exemption in the automobile industry, and it will further support our carbon reduction goals in our commitments to the Paris Agreement. Next slide. This is just a summary of the tax administration reform to close the gap. So I just want to point out here the number 6 item, which is the adoption of automatic exchange of information. This is also included in the House bill version. Next slide, please. So we will show you the revenue impact of the DOF proposal. Next slide. So this is as of January 19, 2024. So assuming that the package 4 will be implemented by Q3 2024, this is the breakdown. So we have tax on passive income, tax on financial intermediaries, tax on transaction, excise tax on pickups, and then we're proposing prospectivity as well. So it will only cover new transactions or contracts. So as you can see here, so from Q3 2024 to 2029, total revenue losses is at 126 billion. So that means an annual average of around negative 21 billion. However, I want to note that we did not include any assumption on behavioral changes, given that this is basically reducing the rates. So you would expect more volume of transaction. Unfortunately, we're still in the process of inputting that changes in behavior in our computation. So in the slide here, that 126 billion does not include any behavioral changes. Next slide. That ends my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Asek Carlo. I think well, I'm sure everyone welcomes the harmonization, some lowering down the freights, making it, like I said earlier, making it simple for compliance and also administration, and also for understanding. A lot of our taxpayers, especially the small investors, they get confused, no? When it comes to computing DSTs, computing tax rates. It's really confusing, no? So because of that confusion, a lot of our retail investors, especially common investors, are hesitant in investing into the capital markets, into insurance, because plain and simple, they don't understand, no, what they are paying, no? So we welcome that, and we're very happy that there's this effort to simplify everything. However, I'm quite concerned with the revenue impact. No? And like I said, no, the context here is we're just getting out of the pandemic. We might not feel the health effects of the pandemic, but we can feel the fiscal effects of the pandemic because our debt is very high. No? Wala nang may sakit, wala nang may COVID, pero lahat tayo nagbabayad pa rin ng utang na kinontract natin during COVID time. So, no, they always say taxes, proposals on taxation is a timing, more or less, it's a timing issue. So I'm looking at whether this is a good time to reduce revenues or not. But what is missing in that presentation is also what you disclose, no? Behavioral changes. No? I truly believe that all of this harmonization, all of this reduction will translate into change in behavior, especially growth in different sectors. No? For example, the pre-need sector. No? Because we will reduce it from 12% to 2%, I'm sure there is some positive impact on that. No? And we'll ask our friends from the industry to share with us. But what I want the DOF to start coming up with is a simulation on behavioral changes. I know it's very difficult, no? Of course, no one has a crystal ball, but let's use our best educated simulations or best guesstimate for that matter to come up with different scenarios. This is just plain and simple, no, revenue reduction. Can we flash that slide? Yung revenue estimates. Iba ito dun sa binigay nyo sa akin eh. Ano? I have a different ano. Can we flash that slide? The last slide. Revenue estimates of the DOF proposal. So what we're saying, over the last, in the next 5 years, we will stand to lose 125 billion. Tama? Tama? No, ASEC will stand to lose 125 billion in terms of revenue take.
Yes, Senator.
And that is why we, even though it's not passive income, you know, pickups obviously it's not passive income. There's a move to remove the exemption for pickup so that it will help soften the negative impact of this proposal. No? And we'll talk about that later on because I remember when we were discussing, I think this is under train, no? Itong pickup. I remember when we were discussing the exemption on pickups, the argument there is because pickups are being used by the agri-sector. No? People in the agricultural sector use this to transport their goods, to transport raw materials, to inspect their fields. And as a support to the agri-sector, we exempted the pickups. No? But now we're saying that the pickups are not being used in the agri-sector. They're actually being converted and being used for passenger purposes. No? So we'll discuss that later on because we need to present that very clearly. May meron akong belief as a politician, once you give, it's hard to take back. Eh, no? So unless you justify it very clearly, so we want to see the justification on that argument that pickups are not being used, or primarily not being, or majority is not being used in the agri sector. It's being used for other purposes. So we need to demonstrate that very clearly in this hearing. And at the same time, I would like to ask the UF to juxtapose this to the medium-term fiscal framework. Because that's the Bible. We legislated that, no? We passed a law that will, in effect, institutionalize the implementation of the medium-term fiscal framework. No? So that's the Bible now, no? Especially on how to reduce debt and outgrow debt. So we need to understand how this will impact that medium-term fiscal framework. Not today, no? Ready na ba kayo with that today?
Sir, we have those numbers, but we need clearance lang, sir, if we
Oo.
can share it.
Yeah. In the next presentation, in the next hearing, present to us. No? Will this negative 125 have an effect in our medium-term fiscal framework? Kung wala naman, then let's demonstrate it. Kung meron, then how do we mitigate it? No? Because we're all concerned. One of the core direction of the medium-term fiscal framework is to reduce debt, to go back to our original 30% to GDP prior pre-pandemic levels. No? So how do we reach that? And there's a very nice presentation there, but that's not taken into consideration PIFITA bill. No? So we need to understand how that will play a role in the medium-term fiscal framework. So, and we want to see that later on. No? I have a lot of questions actually, but I'll reserve that so that we can all hear our colleagues and our resource persons. And it's very important that we get the opinion of our resource persons, especially on the presentation of DOF. And then I'll go back to DOF with my questions later on. But those are the initial things that I want DOF to start running the figures. So with that, we'll call on NTRC, si Ms. Marlene, who's been a very generous resource person of this committee. So Ms. Marlene, any comments on PIFITA?
Well, thank you, Your Honor. Good morning. The National Tax Research Center, as we know, has been fully supportive of the passage of Package 4. It has long been in the legislative pipeline since 17th Congress, and it's already ripe for passage to help the government achieve the much-needed tax reforms in the capital market and financial sector. Well, it's worth highlighting that Package 4 was not primarily designed to generate revenue for the government, but to fix the tax system, or as you mentioned, Chairman, simplify the taxation on passive income, financial intermediaries, and financial transactions. To achieve these objectives, of course, there's a need to reduce and repeal certain taxes in order to directly benefit the majority or the targeted, the poor, but in the long term would create additional revenue stream for the government. What we wish to achieve in Package 4 is better financial structure that will set conditions for more efficient and diversified financial system that will support economic development. Given this, it is our prayer that Package 4 will soon be passed by this august body. As to the revenue impact, Your Honor, when we computed for that, we excluded 2020 data as it is during the pandemic. And we constantly update our data because of incoming new data from the BIR. So that's why there might be differences in the figures. And we take note of having this aligned to the MTFF, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marlene. And you made a very good point. No? I remember, and I think some of our colleagues will remember this, during the discussion of, during the last administration, no? the Duterte administration, there was a huge aspiration to reform our tax system. No? And there were several packages, no? Package 1, Package 2, Train was enacted, Create was enacted, but those were pre-pandemic levels, a pre-pandemic situation. And the scenario that time is totally different. No? So after the pandemic, a lot have changed, especially on our fiscal health. And that's why we need to make sure that all of these laws being implemented is still in line with the medium-term fiscal framework, no, the MTFF, because that is from our understanding when we were discussing the MTFF was that is the direction or the roadmap to return to pre-pandemic fiscal health. No? So that was the direction that the Senate undertook when we enacted that law. No?
Can I comment,
Yes, yes,
sir?
yes.
Precisely under Package 4, we took note of the pandemic. That's why there is a shift in the taxation of pre-need plans HMOs from 12% VAT to 2% premium tax to make these products affordable to the masses, and also the reduction of the ST on non-life insurance from 12.5 to 7.5 to increase insurance penetration in the country and encourage Filipinos to insure their properties to minimize their risks when a contingent event occurs. So that's because of the pandemic. That's why we are trying to shift to the 2% premium tax.
Thank you,
Thank
Ms.
you.
Marlene. Ms. Marlene, I have some questions, no, and I hope NTRC can help us. One of the selling points of this bill is to make our country competitive, no, in terms of the financial sector or the financial industry, whether it's capital markets, the stock market. Earlier, the OF presented rates on interest income, rates on royalties. Do we have a study, comparing ourselves to the ASEAN and then to the rest of the world in terms of what is being covered here in PIFITA? So we will know. No? Earlier, the EOF presented that we're one of the highest in terms of interest income. Can we flash that slide? And then when it comes to royalties, we're also one of the highest. But there are also some other components of PIFITA. No? For example, insurance industry, capital markets. Do we have that study on where are we in terms of competitiveness? And how are we addressing that on this proposed measure?
What we have, Your Honor, is the comparative taxation in the ASEAN for certain available taxes under P4. And we can submit that, Your Honor.
Do we have that? Do you have that now, or is it still raw data?
What was presented by Yusek Adriano.
No. But do we
The
have,
ones
let's say, for
available.
meron lang kasi dito is interest income and royalties. For example, do we have part of the reform is, for example, equity markets, equity and debt markets. Do we have comparative analysis between ito yung pinakita kanina. But PIFITA has many components, no? Equity and debt markets, insurance market, including pre-need and the traditional insurance products. Do we have comparative analysis?
Not yet at this time, Your Honor.
Yeah,
but,
we'll request
we
from-
hope we'll have it.
Yeah, we'll
in the
request from
next meeting.
NTRC and DOF that analysis also. Let's compare ourselves. No? Where are we in terms of competitiveness in the financial sector in ASEAN and probably select countries around the world? And then, how are we addressing that in PIFITA? Because the hope here is we get some financial inflows, for example, from other countries like Thailand or Singapore. You know, hopefully, with the adjustments that are being proposed, we can attract foreign funds coming from other countries. No? So that's also part of the direction. No? So we'll have that. If you can present that later on na rin, no? In the second hearing. Will anything else, Ms. Marlene?
No more at this point, Your Honor.
Yeah. We'll call on the Bureau of Treasury. Any comments on the bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, on the part of the Bureau of the Treasury, aside from what was mentioned before regarding the revenue impact, what is important for us to appreciate here is that improving our competitiveness in the region would also improve the performance of our bond auctions. This will allow us to lower the borrowing costs for our debt by infusing liquidity into our domestic government securities. Currently, Mr. Chair, as of December, I believe the non-resident participation in our bonds is very minimal at 2.2%. Compare this to other countries in the region, which I think for example, Indonesia would be above 20%. Of course, this is a two-edged sword, Mr. Chair. Increasing participation will improve, again, investments in our government securities, but beyond a certain threshold, this can also increase volatility in our financial markets. But given again, once again, the very minimal exposure that we currently have, any improvement in the foreign participation or non-resident participation will, we believe, greatly improve the performance of our bonds, Mr. Chair. So hence, the Treasury fully supports the initiative of PIFITA, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mariano. Ang layo, 2% versus 20%
Yes, Mr. Chair.
non-resident participation. And based on your experience, how come the non-resident participation is very low compared to, let's say, Indonesia, who's a neighbor of ours, similar demographics? How come it's they're getting 20% non-resident and us only 2%?
Mr. Chair, it's purely on the friction cost, Mr. Chair, caused by the high tax rate. Currently, we impose a 20% tax on interest income, but for non-resident, particularly for corporations, this can even increase up to 30%, Mr. Chair, under our current laws. That's why, again, this is keeping back some of the investors because comparatively, they would be getting less from their investment in our domestic bonds. But note that our external issuances, our foreign debt, Mr. Chair, is already tax exempt. So this initiative will move us closer to the at least a comparable rate with our peers.
Do you know how much Indonesia is charging? So that we'll have an idea and we can put that on record.
Currently, Mr. Chair, we can include that perhaps in our report on the
Yeah,
competitiveness.
if just share with us your that's a very important piece of information comparing ourselves to our neighbors. So can you submit to us not only with Indonesia, no, with other neighbors based on your experience on non-resident participation? No? Just help us analyze that so that we can reflect that in our discussion. Thank you. Thank you. We'll call on PEZA. Attorney Romero.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, and to the honorable members of this committee. We have not prepared our comments, Mr. Chair, but we hope we be given additional time to submit it. But without prejudice to that submission of the comment, may we say something now on some of our comments on this proposed PIFITA Act. The most that will have an impact on our registered business enterprises will be this tax on branch profit remittance. Under the current NIRC provision, our RBEs are exempt from paying this tax on branch profit remittance. But with this proposed act or bill, they will now be taxed with 15%. And some of our companies, mostly the IT companies, they're operating here as branch office, Mr. Chair. Another provision that have an impact on our companies will be this treatment of interest expense. There will be a reduced amount of interest expense that can be deducted from the gross income, and as a result, the income that will be taxed will be higher. This will have an impact with our logistics companies because they are the ones who are paying the RCIT, the regular corporate income tax. The others not so because they're under the 5% GIT, and the others also are under income tax holiday. As for the DST, that will be a very welcome change, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Attorney. Just please submit to us some of your position paper on that. But I'm very interested also on that's a good point that you made, no, on the branch profit tax because that's your mga locators yan, no? I would assume. So just submit to us the impact of PIFITA to your locators and to those potential investors coming in. No? That's why I'm very particular with comparing it with our neighbors because we're competing for investments. We're competing with other countries, and it's important also to make sure that we're competitive, or at least we're within the ballpark rates. No? So, and you would understand because you talk to your locators on a regular basis, and understand also that some of our locators who are here right now, and because of all of these changes, are now thinking of expanding outside. No? So I want to understand also how this proposed measure will impact decision-making points of existing locators. No?
Yes, Mr. Chair. In fact, when we talk to them, we already tell them about the incentives, and one of which is this one. So it might be difficult to explain to them how come we are again removing this incentive from them.
How come the locators are currently exempt from branch profit remittance tax right now?
We will check on that, Mr. Chair.
Okay, just include that in your position paper.
Yes,
na
sir.
rin, yeah.
Thank you, sir.
All right. So we've exhausted all of our government agencies. We'll go to our stakeholders. We'll start off with Attorney Baladad. Ma'am, I understand you have a presentation also.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, colleagues. I requested to do a presentation, Mr. Chair, because this is a very important legislation to us, especially in deepening our capital markets. Our Capital Market Development Council has been working on this for decades, and we are happy now that at least it's moving. So while I am no longer the co-chair of the Capital Markets Council, I am still one with them in advocating to deepen the country's shallow capital market. So the first question in evaluating the bill 4339 that we have in our minds is that will it deepen the country's shallow capital market? Will it allow capital market to develop as efficiently as possible with the least intervention? And here is the latest that we got, is data as of end 2021 of, can I have the next slide, please? I think, let me just point out, Mr. Chair, that in this presentation, I limited the discussions to reforms on PIFITA, passive income and financial intermediation. Okay. They requested me to.
We're experiencing some lag. Well, Comsec, do you need the USB? Baka the USB is faster. I think you're streaming from the oh, there. There, okay.
This slide actually shows our standing, Mr. Chair, in the Asian market. As you can see here, as to the number of companies, while we were the first stock exchange to be put in place, we are last with just 249 companies that are listed in the stock exchange. That at one point somebody asked me, do you have a market? Do you call that a market? Because we only have 249. While Vietnam is 735, and Indonesia 731, and all the rest a lot higher than the Philippines. So we are the last, Mr. Chair, in terms of the Asian market. Again, we are also the last in terms of the capital as a percentage of GDP that was raised in the capital market. So the question that we ask, if we can have the next one, please. I think I have another slide there, which is the key metrics, no? So to answer our question, whether it depends the capital market, our key metric is, number one, will it reduce the cost of raising capital and debt? And based on our scoring, the answer is yes. Will it simplify taxation? I think it's there, it's not just showing. And reduce the cost of compliance? Again, we said yes. Will it level the playing field among players, thereby removing tax-induced distortions? Yes. Will it harmonize the taxation of similar products and discourage arbitrage? Yes. Will it promote liquidity by removing or reducing the tax-related friction costs that impedes movement of capital? Yes. Will it make the country more competitive in attracting capital? Yes. And I will answer partly your question a while ago. Will it promote financial inclusion? And our answer is yes. So based on the email that we got, the instruction is for us to just concentrate on HB 4339. Now on the question on reducing cost of capital, as you can see, the bill removes or reduces the unnecessary tax costs that impedes capital market development. And that includes the gradual reduction of stock transaction tax from 0.6% to 1%. It will settle at 0.1%. There is a reduction or removal of DST on many financial product and transactions that at some point there are double DST that could be considered a tax on tax. And the third would be the 2% yearly reduction of tax on interest income from 20% to 15%. I was advised earlier by NTRC that there is no reduction. And we have checked House Bill 4339, and indeed, it's a flat rate of 20% without the phasing out. But I am happy to note that based on the presentation of DOF, there is a reduction from 20% to 15%. And while we were pushing for a one-time reduction, we also understand the revenue, the predicament of the government and the revenue impacts. So I guess a yearly reduction of 2% would just be acceptable. The bill, so this is the metrics that I was talking a while ago, Mr. Chair. I have, next please. Next. Next, please. Okay. Next. Okay. Did it simplify taxation? Yes. It simplified taxation by imposing a single default rate of 15% for all passive capital income, including interest, when it settles to 15%, dividend, capital gains, except, of course, that on real property, which will stay at 6%. So compared to the previous, there is no more distinction as to whether it is an individual or corporate taxpayer. There is no distinction as to residency, no distinction as to tenor, currency, or holding period or issuer, and removes exemption and special rates that complicates tax compliance. And later on, Mr. Chair, maybe we also have to impute the impact of the removal of these exemptions on the revenue impact of this measure. The 15% rate equates with most tax treaty rate, and therefore there is no need to file rigorous application for treaty benefits. It removes also the multi-rated gross receipts tax of 1%, 5%, and 7%, and replace it with a single rate of the highest rate of 5%. Again, this may have an impact on the revenue, the increase to a one-time 5% from 1%, and in fact, others are at zero. It removes the multi-rated tax on interest based on holding period, and replace it with just the rate of, again, when it settles at 15%. Again, I think there is a positive revenue impact of all these measures, and I hope that that is captured in that 126 billion net loss that is being shown to us by NTRC. No, but overall, if you look at the simplification, while it simplifies, it also increased the revenue by itself because of the increases in the rates to single rates. Now, did it level the playing field? Yes, it leveled the playing field among players by removing tax concessions and exemptions to certain players, such as exemption on long-term instruments, and I bet you this is big because that has become already what? A sought-after revenue, do you call that? Gain during that time. And then the exemption of foreign currency denominated transactions. So again, there's a revenue gain there. The exemption is shifted instead to targeted projects to support national development, such as the exemption of project-specific bonds. And first in my mind would be maybe Maharlika bonds would already be exempt under this rule. Then there is this harmonized taxation. Yes, it harmonized taxation of similar products to reduce arbitrage and promote fair play. Where do we find that? By providing similar tax treatment for all collective investment schemes, whether be it a mutual fund, a UITF, or a VUL. It also provides similar tax treatment for similar insurance products by saying that even HMOs, pre-need, pension, are now treated like life insurance products. It harmonized the DST on debt and equity to a single rate of 0.75%, and also it harmonized the taxation of lending investors now as a financial intermediary subject to the GRT rather than the VAT. Did it reduce tax-related friction cost? And again, our answer is yes. It removed DST on domestic money transfers, on certificates and other documents, on bank checks, drafts, certificates of deposits not bearing interest, and others. It also reduced DST on shares of stocks, of course, to 0.75 from 1%, non-life insurance from 12.5 to 7.5 on a gradual reduction. It also reduced in DST on mortgages, on pledges, and on trusts. Now, is it competitive? And this was a question a while ago by the chairman. How do we say that we are now competitive? Well, if we are to adopt the flat rate of 15% default for all passive investment, this is based on our study, and as I remember, this is now within the range of the Asian market, which is 15% more or less. Of course, it's still higher because some are in 10%, 5%, etc. But at least we are now nearer, we are now within that range of what we call a taxation of these products in the Asian region. Why do I say we are still higher? I can say that, for example, on stock transaction tax, nobody in the Asian market would impose that except DST of 0.1% on Indonesia, Indonesian market. But all the rest, there is no stock transaction tax. Will it promote financial inclusion? Certain exemptions on collective investment products has been given to encourage small funding pools from small savers. So yes, there is an exemption of project bonds aligned with national agenda. Hopefully, we'll make it cheaper for the small savers again. There is a removal of DST on domestic money transfers that would then facilitate domestic transfers of money locally. And there is an easier and less costly to access the capital market. Also, a new innovation of this bill, 4339, is the 40% optional standard deduction, not on all corporations, but given to MSMEs, who are, again, the small savers. I would say, Mr. Chair, that this 4339 is a lot a better version of House Bill 304, which was the first version that was sent to Senate before. And why do we say that? Because it removed the 1% bond trading tax, which was then the #1 objection of the Capital Markets Development Council, as it will kill the debt market. The 1% yearly reduction of tax on royalties from 20% to 15% is also an added innovation. It clarified the taxation of liquidating dividends as regular income. It clarified interest income from in-house lending and seller financing as not subject to GRT. It clarified the tax treatment of holding companies. And as I said, it entitles the MSME to 40%. 4339 also provides clarity on the taxation of the collective investment scheme, which is a very big problem during that time or during the current regime, because there's a lot of valuation depending on whether you are a mutual fund or a UITF or a VUL. So now they are harmonized, and in addition to that, there were relief given, like the gains from redemption of shares. These are exempt if taxes were previously withheld already at the level of the CIS. The exemption of CIS also to GRT, VAT, and percentage tax if with 200 participants. So my thinking here is that the policy is to encourage funding pools, no, as a source of capital. Because if you already have 200 participants, and so long as you comply with minimum public ownership, then that's already exempt from GRT or VAT or percentage tax. We, however, have to need to clarify the dividend tax imposed on unregistered CIS like UITF or fund pools. No? What we are happy about also, Mr. Chair, on 4339 is that it provides relief to a very heavily tax-burdened insurance sector. And that is a boost because if you look at the penetration rate in Asia Pacific, can we show ay, hindi siya makita, no? So if you look at the penetration rate for Asia Pacific, we are actually below. The Philippines is just, for life, is 1.5%. Non-life is 0.5%, or just a total of 2%, compared to Hong Kong of 19.6%, or Taiwan, or South Korea, or even Thailand is very high at 5.3%, Malaysia at 4%. Again, so we are again at the bottom in terms of insurance penetration, Mr. Chairman. And therefore, we look at this 4339, and we are happy that it provided relief to this sector by harmonizing, again, as I said, the pre-need, the pension, the HMO as life and health insurance, both for premium tax and for DST. So like the others who used to be subject to VAT are now under premium tax. There is a clarification of exemption of reinsurers from premium tax for life or VAT for non-life if the tax is already paid by the direct insurer. There is an exemption of the income from investment portion of the CIS, because before there's a question whether the investment portion of VUL offered by insurance companies would be subject to a GRT because that's investment income. Here in 4339, it says it is not. So it exempts it from GRT, VAT, and percentage tax, again, provided that there are 200 participants and it complies with the minimum public ownership. There is, as I said, which is very big, an annual phase out of non-life, of the DST on non-life policies. Because right now it is 12.5%, which is even higher than VAT, and they have the same base. So which means at the gross, you are taxed at what, 24.5% already with a VAT and GRT combined. So there's a reduction to 7.5, but we hope that this will still be lowered so that we can reduce the cost of insurance and increase the penetration. Um, so, Mr. Chair, we fully support 4339. Now, on the revenue impact, which you kept on repeating, I guess the impact of the behavioral change is very important to impute because this measure is supposedly to perk up the capital markets, and we're talking about changes in behavior that would increase the volume and others. Also, as I stated earlier, I hope that in that 126 laws, they should also consider the increases due to removal of so many exemptions, no? Like exemptions of long-term instruments, gains from long-term instruments, etc. And also the increased rate of GRT from 1% to 5%. Also, there is an increase in dividend tax from 10% to 15%. And I hope that will balance out everything, Mr. Chair. Generally, though, we support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Baladad. Attorney, you mentioned earlier that, and I heard this from you a few times during my consultation with you, that we're the only country in the world that imposes stock transaction tax.
Yeah, based on our research in, when was the first time we did the PIFITA? Maybe that's around 28.
That's during the 19th Congress Center.
18, yes,
During
2018.
18, yeah.
Yes, when we mapped that out, there is nobody imposing STT. But we saw that in Indonesia, they have what we call a 0.1%, but they call it DST. So let me go back again and check that, Mr. Chair, for accuracy.
My chain of thought there is, if we're the only one in the world that is imposing that, then why not just remove it to make it competitive?
Yes,
of course, the
Mr.
other
Chair.
side is reduction in revenue once again, no? But if that will grow our equities market and make it more inclusive, because the equities market here is really just for the rich, to be honest about it, no? Unlike in other jurisdictions, I remember in Hong Kong, even the taxi driver invest.
Yes.
They put their savings or they invest in the stock market, no? So my point of the matter there is, by reducing more friction cost, hopefully we can go down to the general public and encourage them to invest. At the same time, more companies will be encouraged to go public instead of just raising capital through private means, no? So, of course, my question is, can you also help us come up with a study on how a removal of this type of friction cost can develop our equities market? Definitely, there is some positive change, no? But how do we? Can we help your? Can we ask your expertise to help us come up with some simulations on how we can see a potential growth in the equity market if we remove this stock transaction tax?
In our team before with the OF, Mr. Chair, we had that econometrician. Econometrician tawag dun, no? That supposedly will have to quantify yung changes in behavior of this pagka ginalaw mo ang tax na to. So what happens? Maybe the OF can look at the report of that econometrician.
We'll request DOF again, no? Earlier I requested from them to simulate and help account the behavioral changes, the growth in the market, if there is any growth, or the contraction, if there's any contraction. But definitely one of the offshoots here is to grow the market, no? Specifically capital, equities, debt, insurance, as you mentioned earlier. So we need to capture that, so that it's not only focus on that revenue loss, but we also focus on increasing the size. And at the same time, you also increase employment, no? with financial inclusion, you also increase potential new jobs in that particular sector. You know? So we need to capture all of this, or else it will be focused on just that 125 billion revenue loss. You know? Go ahead, Sec.
Uh, um, Mr. Chair, actually we have some preliminary behavioral changes. So first, what we did is look at the literature. Unfortunately, there's no ASEAN-specific literature on the possible behavioral changes of this item. So we take a look at the world experience in terms of what happened to the transaction when they did some reforms. So we have some behavioral changes assumption, but again, it's still very preliminary, so that's why I'm not presenting it yet on some items. Now, we're also working with Dr. Reside right now. I think he has some preliminary regression already for some of the items. So hopefully we'll be done soon and we'll be able to present some of the behavioral assumptions that we actually considered.
We'll make that presentation in the next hearing. No? We want to capture all of that and put on record so that those people will look at the transcript later on, will understand also that one of the objectives of the bill is to grow the financial sector. No? And we have to input that also in our discussion. I'll have questions, Attorney, but I'll reserve that later on so that we'll give everyone an opportunity to share their thoughts. We'll call on Attorney Ricalde of Phoenix. Financial Executive Institute of the Philippines.
Yeah. Good morning, Mr. Chair. Actually, I was requested to attend here given the we're just provided a copy of the House bill last Friday, but certainly it will be our pleasure to submit our position paper following the solicitation of comments from our members. We're thankful to the presentation of Attorney Dick Baladad on the capital markets. Somehow there will be symmetry there. And also with respect to the insurance companies, because in my practice, I am the head of the Accra Law Tax Department, and somehow I've been consulted on a lot of these issues as well, given the current practices. But going back, Mr. Chair, we will submit our position paper on this matter. Thank you.
Attorney, can you cite us since you're a practitioner, can you cite us or give us an example, a concrete example on how the present system governing insurance companies, no? And what are the typical complaints, what are the typical complications, and how this bill will address those complications that you have encountered in your practice, no?
Mr. Chair, I refer to the present practice of the BAR relative to the withholding tax on reinsurance premiums. They're pointing out that with respect to the reinsurance premiums of foreign companies, okay, that's exempt, explicitly provided here. However, if you're a reinsurer, okay, somehow the withholding tax and typically the main insurance company is required as a large taxpayer to withhold 1% on the entire premium. But unfortunately, it's a huge amount vis-a-vis the ultimate income, because if a portion of the premium is even set aside for the mandatory ceding of risk following the requirement of the Insurance Commission. That's an example, Mr. Chair. And we believe that, one, if there's a removal of that exemption on reinsurance premium, at least the income should be captured, not an amount that will be, even the amount that is required to be earmarked by the Insurance Commission for the risk assumed should be excluded and should be clarified, at least in the law.
Is it clarified in the law?
Right now, Mr. Chair, it's not in the proposed House bill. It simply removes the exemption of the foreign reinsurers, but it's silent on what will be the implication, in particular, on the withholding tax. Thank you.
Thank you. Attorney, just submit to us a position paper on that. No? Those are, I guess, fine-tuning on the bill. No? Generally, it captures most of the complications, but there are things that we can still improve. And just submit to us a position paper on that.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. We call on Attorney Jacqueline U. Villar of TMAP.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. For TMAP, we have collected our replies from our members, particularly from the bank, the insurance, and the real estate. And so we will be able to submit our position paper. But then, generally, we really support this HB 4339. But at this time, the comments we receive are more on the dividends rate of 10%, from 10 to 15%, which is, I know we want to be competitive regionally, but then this one is will be on the other side, meaning the Philippines will not be competitive if we will increase it from 10 to 15%. And then the other is keeping the incentive on long-term investments or deposits, keeping the tax exemption. So with that, we can still encourage long-term placements, and it will also create stability to the financial sector. That's it, Your Honor.
Let me direct a question to the DOF, no? And Attorney Balada opened this earlier, that there's now a uniform rate, no, regardless of the maturity at 15%. And correct me if I'm wrong, the intention before is to encourage more investments in the long-term maturity, no? But by removing that, of course, the pro there is it's simple, but the con there is there's no more incentive to put your money long-term, no? So, do we have any data on the effect of that change? How much of I know that in part of your presentation earlier, you said that only the rich enjoy that lower tax rate because it's only the rich that can invest long term. No, I think that's the rationale there. But then again, whether rich or poor, long term is beneficial to the investing public, no, or the investing industry. So, do we have any data on, for example, how much are we looking at in terms of long-term maturity, and what will be the impact if we now have a flat rate of 15? There also will be behavioral changes there, no? But I think most of the time, people who invest long-term, aside from looking at the rates, the tax rate, they're looking at the returns, no? I think the returns are much more important. But can we run that figure? DOF, do you have that ready?
Mr. Chair, first I would like to note that I think the position of the BSP for the long-term deposits, particularly on the rates, their position is same with us at 15%. I think what they mentioned in their position paper is that the market, the needs of the market already changed. Before we need more long-term, so there was an incentive given through a lower rate. But right now, as per the BSP's position, I think they mentioned there that there's no more need for that. For the number of depositors in terms of maturity, for those less than 3 years, it's already 99.6% of all the deposits. For the 3 to 5 years, it's 0.27%. For more than 5 years, it's 0.13%. So again, basically almost 100% are in the short-term deposits.
But in terms of amounts, I would assume the amounts are different, no?
For the amounts, for 15,000 and below in terms of distribution of accounts, it's 80% of the total. 15,000 to 40,000, it's 7%. 40,000 to 2 million is 12%, and over 2 million is 1%.
You said that 99.6% are less than 3 years.
Yes, sir.
So the remaining the remaining 0.4%
Is the
in
three
terms of amounts, is that bigger
in
or
terms of amount?
I'm just curious. If you don't have that, ASEC, we can do that later on na lang. Because that's also one of the, in the position papers that I've read, that's
Yes,
also
sir.
one of the
We
contentions.
only have here for the amount given the brackets 15,000 and below 15 to 40. I can mention the total in billions. So for the 15,000 and below, in terms of total amount of deposits, although in terms of account it's 80%, its contribution in terms of billions of pesos is only 126 billion. So that's around 0.71%, 0.71% of the total in terms of the amount of deposit. For the 15,000 to 40,000, in terms again of number of accounts, they contribute 7%, but in terms of billion of pesos, it's 167 billion, or in percentage share, it's 0.94%. For the 40,000 to 2 million, in terms of number of accounts, its percentage share, it's 12%, but in terms of billions of pesos, it's around 3 billion or 3 trillion? 3 trillion 502 billion, or in terms of their share, that's around 19.7%. For the over 2 million, in terms of number of accounts, their share is 1%, but in terms of billion pesos, it's 13.9 trillion. That's around 78.64% of the total.
Tama ba? What you're saying is, even though majority of the account is less than 3 years, but in terms of size, the longer maturities are bigger?
No, sir. This is only for the yung classification of deposits in terms of value.
Yeah.
15,000 and below, 15 to 40, 40,000 to 2 million, and over 2 million. We will provide, sir, yung for the in terms of maturity.
Yeah, okay.
We don't have that yet in billions of
Okay.
pesos.
Yeah, next hearing na lang, we'll show
Yes, sir.
that. No? Because in the position papers that I've read, that's also one of the issues that some of our stakeholders raise, no? That there's no more distinction or there's no more incentive to hold it long term, no? Which the country needs. But what you're saying is the needs now of the country has changed. Fortunately, we don't have BSP here to elaborate on that, and we'll direct the committee secretary to invite the BSP later on to shed light on that change, no? In terms of what the country needs in terms of maturities. No? And then also, Attorney Villar, you also mentioned the dividends, no? Because we're raising it from 10 to 15%, and your view is it might not make our country competitive, no? And this is especially important for investors, no? Who are coming in, and of course they want their dividends to reap their rewards. But do you have any comparative analysis on that, Attorney, so that will be enlightened?
Oh, yes. Yes, Mr. Chair. Based on our analysis, we have 4 of 9 other ASEAN countries do not impose tax on dividend income of individuals, like Brunei, Malaysia, Myanmar, and Vietnam. And then Singapore generally does not impose tax on dividends. Laos and Thailand generally impose 10% tax on dividends. Indonesia imposes 15% tax on dividend income for residents and 20% for non-residents. So that's why we said that increasing it to 15% will not make us competitive to the neighboring countries in Asia Pacific.
4 out of 9 ASEAN countries do not impose
Tax on dividends.
tax on dividends. Okay. Who are these 4?
Brunei, Malaysia, Myanmar, and Vietnam. And Singapore generally does not impose tax on dividends. So generally, for Singapore.
Yeah. So Brunei, Malaysia,
Myanmar and Vietnam, 0%.
Okay.
And then Thailand, tax 10%.
Okay. And Singapore do not-
Generally, so maybe there have some exemptions or some arrangements, but generally they do not impose tax on dividends.
Thank you. Thank you for that, attorney. We'll call on BAP, Bankers Association of the Philippines, represented by Ms. Chona Reyes.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Chair. And first of all, I'd like to thank the committee for inviting the BAP to express our views and suggestions on House Bill 4339. We also received the invitation last Friday. We have shared the bill with our members and we're collecting comments, and we should be able to submit our position paper within the week. One of the items that we will be commenting on, or we have views or suggestions on, would be the repeal of the stock transaction tax, and also the retention of the exemption of interest income on long-term deposits, some clarifications on the GRT proposed revisions, rationalization of a few sections of the DST law, as well as the retention of the FCDU, retention of the preferential tax treatment of the FCDU. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We will be able to submit our position paper within the week.
Ms. Chona, can you elaborate on that retention of the FCDU particularly? I read that also in some of our position papers, no? And that's also one of the things that I want to focus on.
We will be explaining the rationale of our request for the retention of the FCDU in the position paper that we'll be submitting. But one of the rationalization or justification for our request, we see that a removal of the exempt preferential tax treatment of the FCDU would eventually increase funding costs, and therefore would result to rise in cost of lending of the borrowers, which will translate to higher cost of goods, which eventually will impact the consumers. Also for the borrowers in foreign currency, given that there will be increase in lending rates, then even the government who will be borrowing will also increase their borrowing costs. Those are a few of the justifications in the position paper that we're currently preparing, which we'll be submitting to the committee, sir.
Thank you, thank you. And in that position paper, may I request just examples, no, on that particular, for example, increased in lending rates and eventual increase in goods, because that's a pass-on cost. So if you can cite some examples for us, no? From your members,
Yeah,
so that we'll have concrete examples on hand.
We'll include numbers,
Yeah.
Your Honor.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll call on the Philippine Dealing Exchange Corp, Mr. Antonio Nakpil.
Mr. Chair, we'd like to thank you for inviting us to express our opinion. Likewise, we'd also like to submit a position paper, but we will consolidate this with the Capital Markets Development Council, of which we are members of. We are the same view as Attorney Baladad, in that we fully support the simplification and the streamlining of the tax rates, especially with regard to reaching the 15%. It used to be sooner rather than later, but I guess we accept that COVID has indeed taken its impact, and the DOF has to delay that reduction of the 20% final withholding tax, which has kept the Philippines as a distinct leader in terms of taxes within the region. But bringing it down to 15, at least 5 years from now, hopefully not 5 years from now, but hopefully sooner rather than later, 3 years? well, 3 years according to, but I think the latest presentation of their CTRP4 is they are mentioning 2028. Mukhang hindi 3 years. Huh? So the item that we have of grave concern for the debt market is the transaction tax, which is being called the presumptive capital gains tax. As Attorney Baladad said, there's no other country that has a stock transaction tax. We take her on that word. There definitely is no other country within the region that will do a presumptive capital gains tax, which we call in our position paper as a financial transaction tax. It's really a punitive tax. It's a tax that is imposed on activities that the government wants to deter from happening. So they put that on, I think the Europeans wanted to put that on derivatives activities post-2008, 2009. And that type of a tax, which is being called the presumptive capital gains tax, is being put into the debt markets, and that's highly anti-investor because it's only the investors that will pay that tax. The dealers are exempt. The GS are also exempt, which is fantastic because the GS transactions are 98. We understand there's some desire to equalize between equity and fixed income and debt, no? But debt is not equity. Debt has maturities. Equities don't. Any tax that you put on debt is going to have to be imposed on that certain maturity of the instruments. So it's not fair to actually just say, it's an oversimplification, if I may use the term, to just say, I should equalize between debt and equity. They are just two different asset classes. Now, you want the fixed income market to have longer tenors. That's the natural desire. Our own cause for existence is to reduce the burden on the bankers, on the banks in general, to develop the capital markets, which is the 5, 10, 20-year money. And the banks definitely don't have that money per se, because commercial banks, by the way their balance sheets are set up, are not set up to give out 5, 10% money per se. The deposits on average are shorter than that. Their liquidity concerns, their concerns for bank runs, for deposit runoffs are all short tenor in nature. No? I mean, even global crises have just re-emphasized that fact of being for banks. So we would reiterate, and I guess we will put this, and I think Attorney Baladad has already cited that both the CMDC and Attorney Baladad have said that about HB 4339. We see it, however, in the SB, the Senate bills, that presumptive capital gains, no? And we'd like to really push hard for the removal of that feature. Thank you. I think.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mr. Nakpil. And we'll call on Ms. Casals Diaz,
Your Honor.
of CMDC. Yes.
Yes. Thank you, sir, for inviting us here to briefly discuss our view. But as mentioned by Mr. Nakpil and Attorney Baladad, we propose to submit our position paper after getting all the comments and views of our members, which are basically those who are seated here as well: Finex, BAP, PDEX, DOF, and the Bureau of Treasury are also a member. So we would like to consolidate their comments and position before we submit for the council. But we'd like to say that PIFITA is part of the priority legislative agenda of the Capital Market Development Council. This is a result of the studies conducted by the council. I think that was in 2018 to 2019. And with that, it is part of the Capital Market Development Blueprint of the council, which has been adjusted or updated for the years 2022 to 2028. Which is the period of the administration. So we hope to achieve the goals and objectives of this priority legislative agenda, as also it includes the Capital Market Development Act. It is also proposed under the council, which is basically to cover the demand side, because it's part of the CMDA is the financial literacy program, or educating the investors, and to have really an institution, which is the Capital Market Development Council, to implement the various plans and programs to push for the capital market development of the country. So for the PIPITA, it will allow capital market to develop as efficiently as possible with the least intervention. And we hope that the capital markets channel the wealth of savers to those who can put it to long-term productive use. So it's aligned actually with the medium-term goals of the administration, which is to provide other sources of funds to fund infrastructure and other development programs of the country. So it could be a great source of revenue as well, because it will, the expectation is that once these tax legislations are approved, the CMDA and the PIFITA, it will increase the volume of capital market transactions, and it will encourage companies to do public offering of their securities. And these companies will be able to fund a lot of businesses, will increase employment, will fund infrastructure through the public-private partnerships, and it will lessen the impact of this fund requirement from the government, Your Honor. So as mentioned by Attorney Baladad, we try to address the identified issues. So we conducted this root cause analysis, and we found out that the cost of raising equity in the Philippines is 14% greater than those in the region or in the world, or one of the highest in the world. So although we have to get updated information of this, Your Honor, because it's based on pre-pandemic data. And one of the findings as well is that there is low turnover or liquidity in equity market. This could also be rooted from the high cost of transactions or taxes on transactions. There are few listed companies which, based on the root cause analysis, is that this is arising from the high transaction taxes. So it discourages companies to list their shares because of the cost. So when they compare the cost of getting loans, or as compared to getting loans or to do a public offering of their securities, they find that it's higher to do a public offering of their securities, given the taxes and all the cost of registration and listing of their securities. And based on the analysis as well, there is low savings as a percentage of GDP as compared to other countries in the region. So we are the lowest. The Philippines is the lowest in terms of savings as compared to GDP, which is also can be a result of the lack of or insufficient financial education of savers and investors in the Philippines. So with that, Mr. Chair, we would like to request that our comments from the Council be submitted as soon as we consolidate the comments from our members, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Diaz. I was looking at the presentation of Attorney Baladad. And interestingly, Thailand, we can flash the slide, no? The market cap is $151 billion. The Philippines, which is now a much bigger country, is 274 billion. So I would like to compare ourselves to Thailand, no? Because Thailand more or less probably is the same in terms of economic size, but their market cap in their stock market is twice as big as the Philippines. No? I would like to ask maybe CMDC or Attorney Baladad, have you studied and compared ourselves to Thailand in terms of listed company, in terms of the equities market? And I think this is a good case study. And how come they're attracting more in their equities market compared to us? What are the what are the friction costs, vis-a-vis compared to us? Do we have that data ready, or do we have that information ready?
We already did a comparative table of the taxes on financial transactions, Mr. Chair, but that's perhaps 2018, so we may have to update that.
What off top, Attorney Balada, if you remember off top, what are the cost associated?
GST.
DSTs in the listing. This is
In there,
public
they
listing.
don't have. I think. I mean, it's very minimal. But of course, tax would only be one. But it's a big part in improving or deepening the market, because as you impose tax, because since these are transaction tax, then patong yan, and the cost is so high. As explained by Monet, we have compared also the cost of capital. And we found out na runaway talaga tayo in terms of cost, Mr. Chair. Ang layo. We are too costly. And it's identified to taxation. Of course, other than our intermediaries and the lawyers' fees, etc., but it's really tax.
Can we make a presentation later on na lang or through a position paper comparing ourselves to our other nations, no, in terms of raising capital through equities? No? I would like to have that comparison, so be educated. And we can also include that in our records. No? Later on na lang in our next hearing. Thank you for that. And then we also have a representative from DBP, EVP Mylene Peras.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, DBP appreciates the opportunity to be able to give its comment on the Senate bills based on the invitation and instruction received last Friday on this public hearing. DBP fully support the PFITA initiative, the simplification and push for improved competitiveness of the country. And DBP will study the 4 Senate bills under discussion and based on House Bill 4339 also, and submit the position paper as soon as possible. And talking about simplification, based on what DOF presented earlier, it is a welcome development on the simplification of GRT for FIs of 5%. The actual impact to DBP of that 5%, I cannot say as I don't have the data, Mr. Chair, but DBP will submit its position paper. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for that. Well, I was hoping that NEDA will join us, no? So I'd like to also get their opinion on the how this bill can impact the overall growth of our economy from an economic standpoint. Um, uh, we're also growing the financial sector, no? The different components of the financial sector. So I would assume that this has positive impact on our overall economy in terms of contributions. And I would like to ask NEDA to give that computation, but unfortunately, I think they're only observers. No? There are observers. We'll invite NEDA next time so that they can also share their thoughts on that. And then we'll, of course, one of the most important stakeholders, BIR, is not here. I think we would like to hear from them also how this will improve from administration standpoint, how it will improve their lives in terms of administration and collection, and what are the common complications that they encounter as well. No? But they are not here right now. So we've exhausted all of our resource persons. Are there any more comments or
Mr. Chair?
thoughts on this bill? Yes, Sec, go ahead.
Can I answer some of the concerns of our stakeholders?
Yes, go ahead.
So number one, for the presumptive CGT,
Yeah.
capital gains tax, it's not part of the DOF proposal. So everything is stock transaction tax. For the FCD use, again, we would like to note the position of the BSP. As per the BSP, the preferential tax treatment of FCD use was given at a time when foreign exchange was low to build up foreign reserves and provide foreign loans and investments to the Philippines. With the current volume of OFW remittances, sustained business processing outsourcing revenues, the more than sufficient gross international reserves, and the liberalization of entry of foreign banks, there is no longer a need for this preferential treatment, according to the BSP. And then for the dividends, increasing it from 10 to 15%, we recognize that in terms of tax rate for dividends, we're relatively high. Given our data for tax on dividends of residents, the average for ASEAN is actually 4.5%. For corporation, it's 2%. Now, on tax on dividends of non-residents, the average for ASEAN is around 8.4%. For corporation, it's 8%. Now, why are we proposing to actually increase it from 10 to 15%? Because it's very progressive. According to the data of 2021 FIES, the 10th percentile group accounts for 90% of all the dividends. For the first to third decile, it's less than 0.8%, their contribution to dividends. So increasing it from 10 to 15% will be a very progressive tax system. And then for the concern on, what's the other one?
Assume that's why it's like that, because only the rich will have dividends.
Yes,
no? I mean,
only the rich can access dividends.
Correct,
usually.
correct. Because they can invest in companies, they
Yes.
can invest in equities, therefore they can receive dividends. And that's what I'm saying earlier, that in other jurisdictions, I remember in Hong Kong when I rode a taxi, I remember the taxi driver was looking at his phone because of, this is a long time ago, monitoring his investment in the stock market. No? So it goes to show that the retail market in Hong Kong is quite wide, no? Because ordinary citizens can invest in the stock market. No? So the other side of the equation in increasing the dividends is the competitiveness. No? And that's what I also want to explore with the OF, how they investors, foreign investors, when they come in, they rely on dividends, especially to justify their investments here in the Philippines. How will that affect the potential investments that will be coming or will be attracting in the future? So we want to explore that with the UF.
Yes, sir. And then we already have data for the specifics on time deposit by term. So from 2018 to 2022, for those less than 3 years, it's 50% yung kanilang share. It's around 1.3 trillion pesos. For time deposits ranging from more than 3 years to 5 years, their share is around, how much is this? 40%. So it's almost around 1 trillion total pesos. Now, for the more than 5 years, its percentage share to the total, it's 10%. In terms of billions of pesos, it's around 266 billion pesos. So this is the average from 2018 to 2022.
So what you're saying is half is
Half, it's still less than 3 years.
less than 3 years. Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Yes. Go
may
ahead.
I answer that competitiveness with respect to increasing from 10 to 15%, no? In terms of attracting foreign investments. Remember that the 10 to the tax on dividend is only imposed on resident individuals, no? Because if it's corporation, it's intercorporate, and therefore it's zero. And those that are coming in to invest in the country are mostly corporations. So, and they are taxed at 25% final tax, which is equivalent to the highest rate for corporations. So I guess that would not matter in terms of attracting foreign investments because most of them are actually corporations coming in.
Thank you for that. Yes, Attorney Recalde.
Mr. Chair, since the DOF, I understand that not all the provisions in the House bill came from DOF or not necessarily aligned with the position of DOF. Maybe also be clarified on what's the intent behind the clarificatory provisions on the definition of depot subs. I am, with respect to the intent of regarding the prohibition on having more than 20 or more holders during the term of the instrument. I am raising this because of the peace bonds case and precisely the arguments raised by the BIR at the time were exactly the same provisions incorporated in this proposed clarification. And the Supreme Court already embanked. And let me emphasize that it's highly factual in character, and we don't, when it comes, simply because you trade or you assign the instrument, should not be considered as, should not be counted in having existed. With respect to the possibility of an holder securitizing, okay, it's a piece of that instrument and necessarily not reflected in the original term. I believe that should also be clarified that it should not necessarily negate the instrument from becoming a non-depot sub. Right now, Mr. Chair, if it's a depot sub, it's 20% taxation. I understand it will eventually be reduced, hopefully to 15. Although for private placement or specifically syndicated in character, the regulation already imposes a 15% CWT tax on that. So still there's a disparity, and the concern here is that if immediately implemented, somehow we may have another round of litigation on what's precisely the intent of this one. Is it the intention to reverse that reasoning of the Supreme Court in ruling in favor of the holders at that time?
DOF, you have any reply to that query?
Mr. Chair, this is the position of the DOF on that matter. So generally adopted the definition under Section 95 of RA 7653, the inclusion of the 20 lender rule in the definition and the mere issuance of government debt instruments and securities is deemed falling within the coverage of deposit substitutes. The treatment of government-issued debt securities as deposit substitute is the prevailing tax rule, and its inclusion in the definition is only meant to codify the prevailing tax rule under RR 14/2012. A debt instrument is considered a deposit substitute if with 20 or more lenders at any one time, which is determined at the time of the original issuance of the financial instrument, up to the trading on the secondary market or its entire term and not merely the point of origination or issuance. It should be every transaction executed in the primary or secondary market in connection with the purchase or sale of securities.
Yes, go ahead, Attorney.
Mr. Chair, I believe the cited basis of the DOF was precisely the subject matter of that Supreme Court case in the peace bonds. So somehow I am raising that question if by inserting this provision, somehow is it the intent to somehow overcome or reverse that more or less Supreme Court decision in the peace bonds case? Because if that's the case, then there will be somehow an impact or needing clarification relative to the treatment of non-depo sub-instruments, in particular those issuances also by the BTR.
We'll request DOF to study that matter and then get back to us. We'll have a series, well, we're targeting 2 hearings, no, and then a lot of technical working groups. But in the next hearing or the technical working group, we can resolve that. No? And please send to us, Attorney, your position paper on that as well.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Just so happened we represented the petitioners in that case. That's why
right.
we took note of the position of the DOF.
Okay. Any more comments or opinions on the matter, on the bill? If not, we can suspend this hearing for now, and we'll request DOF. Actually, we have a lot of requests from DOF, no? Because I want to, aside from the issues surrounding the different financial sector components, I really want to look at the entire objective of the bill, especially on revenue, especially on how it will impact the entire planning within that medium-term fiscal framework, and also how it will impact the economy. No? And NEDA will be requested to shed light on that. So to the DOF, we have some data requests to the DOF, and we'll furnish you all of this through email, but I'll dictate it now. Data used for the latest revenue estimates, the tax-based, the rate-based, on the latest DOF version. I have a different estimates. I think that's the one you gave us last October. Number 2, effects on the medium-term fiscal framework. Number 3, effects of PIFITA on the market behavior. We will need the expertise of our other stakeholders in analyzing this. If we can come up with a simulation, then that will be the best, so we can capture that. To NTRC, comparative rates in the ASEAN region. And then PESA, position paper, impact of PIFITA on the locators, rationale on their exemption from branch profit taxes. And then to Attorney Baladad, how the removal of friction cost develop the equity market. What else? And then to the Banker Association of the Philippines, cite examples on the discussion, regarding the effects of increase on foreign currency deposit units. The removal of the exemption, will that affect OFW remittances? Exempt sila, no?
yes.
Yeah, Attorney, can you put that on record? So
Yes, there's a specific provision exempting them. Your Honor.
OFW. So there's no effect to our OFWs.
Yes,
No?
sir.
So okay, let's. I want to put that on record. And then what else? Yeah, that's it. But we'll email you a list of the data that we need. No? For now, we'll suspend this hearing, and later in the next hearing, we'll invite DOF again, NEDA, of course the BIR, some of our stakeholders who are here. We'll invite the insurance group. The next will be the insurance group and also the GOCCs, because there are a lot of repeals that are included in the bill. And I would like to ask DOF also, we're repealing how many? 50 plus different laws? Tama ba? 39 different laws? 35 different laws. No, we're repealing it because we're saying is we want to expand the base, and this is those provisions erode, no, the tax base. But I want to understand also the amounts that is being talked about in those provisions. I'm very sure some of those provisions are not even being used by the GOCCs. No? But nevertheless, I want to capture that and discuss that here in the hearing, so that the repeal of those provisions will be quantified. No? So it's not only just repeal, we're quantifying the repeal and how it will improve the tax base. Like I said, no, as a politician, one of the things that I learned, once you give all of this, it's hard to retract it. No? So we need to justify it very clearly why those 35 laws, is eroding our tax base. No? We have to quantify that.
This is noted, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so if there are no more comments on the bill, we'll suspend this hearing for now, and then we'll send you an invitation, most likely next Monday once again. No? Hopefully we can terminate that session, and then we can move to our technical working group where all the real work will start, and a lot of discussions will happen there. No? So thank you very much again for your time and participation. This hearing is hereby suspended.